growing importance of cash-based responses to emergencies has potentially far-reaching consequences for the ways in which humanitarian relief is managed and delivered. And that sounds like it could have been taken out of, something like the report of the high-level panel for humanitarian cash transfers. But in fact, that's from 2007. It's a quote from Paul Harvey's report on cash-based responses in emergencies. And it's now nearly a decade later. And with the World Humanitarian Summit, we have a golden opportunity to act on it. And just a background side, so I'll be speaking the rest of the time. So even independent of the World Humanitarian Summit, right now cash transfers are at a crossroads where we have very good evidence on their use, in fact better evidence than most forms of humanitarian response, and growing practice including examples of using cash transfers at scale, such as in Somalia. And the choice is that we either take forward cash transfers in ways that maximize their flexibility and their transformative potential for the humanitarian system, which was alluded to, in fact, even more than alluded to by the two previous speakers, or we take them forward in ways that recreate existing weaknesses in the humanitarian system. And I am optimistic that cash transfers are part of the solution that can even be contributing to solutions related to the weaknesses behind the planning of the World Humanitarian Summit that's driving this scrutiny. Obviously not all of them, but they can play an important role. And I think that there are some very concrete and straightforward commitments that can help us achieve them. And many have been circulating ahead of the summit, and it'll be quite exciting to see what comes out. And I think the most important one, also mentioned by Owen and Sarah Almer, is that we do need to shift the burden of proof away from cash transfers. And that's a very straightforward commitment to make by asking why not cash, and if not now, when. And there might be some very good answers related to why not, but we need to also commit to having the capacity to distinguish between good answers and bad excuses, because those are not the same. We also need to commit to creating an enabling environment for cash transfers. And I know that sounds vague, but at this point in time, we don't know the perfect models for delivering cash transfers at scale. There's no perfect balance between the private sector on one hand and NGOs and UN agencies and governments and social safety nets. What we do know is that that's going to be context specific based on capacities in place, based on financial systems. And so we need commitments to creating an enabling environment for these good models to emerge. And part of that is about getting better at operating in unfamiliar terrain. There will be a growing tendency, and I think there already is, for a tendency for aid agencies to want to control the outcomes of cash transfer programming by either doing it for narrow objectives and looking only at that, or by opting for vouchers, which can be appropriate in many instances, but in other times they're used solely for the purposes of tracking. And I think we need to commit to using cash-based responses in ways that maximize their flexibility and connect people to existing financial systems rather than creating our own humanitarian ones that may just be done for the purposes of control. And we also need to commit to developing our own capacity within humanitarian agencies and within the system itself to basically to better work with the Visas, MasterCards, Segovias, banks, and the thousands of local financial actors. These businesses have zero interest in replacing aid workers, but they have a huge interest in doing their job at facilitating payments and getting money to people. And we're currently not well enough placed to fully take advantage of the private sector. So to fully profit from the private sector, we do need to commit to bringing the right capacities and skills into the humanitarian system to make these linkages. And we also have some very easy wins about using cash transfers in ways that are a bit more logical and can work across some of the divides in the humanitarian system. And one of these is to commit to modifying humanitarian response plans and strategic response plans, to commit to modifying these processes so that cash transfers can be systematically included in ways that cross sectors where this is appropriate. I believe right now, and please email me if you have another example, there's only been 2 cases where there are response plans that have used multi-purpose cash transfers or cash transfers where they're designed to take into account more holistic needs of households and not just needs in a particular sector. And I believe those examples are Iraq and Ukraine. And this is more than 10 years after the piloting of cash transfers in response to the Indian Ocean tsunami, and of course there are examples before that as well. And I think that's quite a concerning statistic, and so we do need a commitment to change it. And while we can always use more evidence and learning, what we don't need right now are so much randomized control trials of cash versus X, but committing to changing a mindset whereby we are willing to transfer over a small amount of the vast power that the humanitarian agencies and the humanitarian system have in these settings over to people by providing them with cash transfers. And again, this might sound like a softer commitment, but if we don't have this change in mindset, I'm very much concerned that cash transfers will always be done in ways that reflect our existing weaknesses and control and not really break out of some of the silos and tendencies that we have as a system. And that does not mean that we do not look at outcomes. In fact, this gives us a huge opportunity to look at how aid changes people's lives as opposed to looking at what was given and to how many people. And we need to take advantage of that opportunity and commit to doing so. So I'd like to close by bringing this idea of being at a crossroads. The choices are we either incrementally increase cash transfers or we commit to doing this in a more radical way where they are appropriate, of course, as always, and that must require, that requires always asking why not cash transfers. Either we're going to do it in the same ways that we've been doing in-kind aid, or we use cash transfers in ways that can potentially transform and work across are not helpful. And that's not just within the humanitarian sector, but obviously making stronger linkages with the private sector and with social protection systems where that's viable. And either we seize the opportunity to do cash transfers in a way that's flexible for the people that we're assisting based on the radical notion that they are well placed to know their needs, or we do this in very controlled ways that imply that we know better than they do. And I really hope it is that we take advantage of the huge transformative potential of cash transfers at the WHS. Thank you very much.